Human history is filled with stories of how science and the passion for discovery illuminated the world. Penicillin curing diseases, laws of physics bringing the heavens to our feet, medical revolutions extending human life. We have always viewed science as a torch elevating humanity. But when the calendars marked the mid-1930s, in the very heart of Europe, within one of the most rational and educated societies in history, that torch was inverted. Science was turned into a weapon, not to keep humanity alive, but to make a specific group superior and systematically destroy everyone else. This is the Third Reich, a dark era where hypotheses were tested not in laboratory test tubes, but on helpless human beings in concentration camps. Today, we step behind the lines of known history to look at the monstrosity hidden beneath medical gowns, the horrifying experiments in the laboratories of the Third Reich, and the darkest pages of medical history. Welcome to Tarihin Izinder, Anlatılmayanlar. Today we will examine how ideological blindness can turn science into a living nightmare, in its rawest, most painful truths, under the light of official documents. Lean back, because what you are about to hear today will push the boundaries of not just history, but humanity itself. Many of us think that the atrocities in Nazi Germany were merely the work of a few mad generals or bloodthirsty dictators. This is a misconception we cling to comfort ourselves. The reality is far colder and more systematic. Behind the Third Reich stood a massive academic framework: professors, medical doctors, biologists, and anthropologists. It all started with a single concept: Rassenhygiene, racial hygiene. This concept was not invented in Nazi Germany. It had gained traction worldwide, even in America and Britain, during the late 19th century with the misinterpretation of evolutionary theory and the rise of social Darwinism. However, no state in the world had ever made this theory the official policy and supreme law of the land, until 1933. To the Nazis, the German nation was a biological organism. And like any biological organism, it had to be cleansed of disease cells. In their eyes, Jews, Roma, the mentally or physically disabled, and even chronically ill German citizens were seen as parasites, hindering the healthy development of this organism. They were lives unworthy of life, lebensunwertes Leben. Prominent figures like Professor Ernst Rudin, who taught at medical faculties at the time, made medical students forget their Hippocratic oath. The duty of a doctor was now redefined, not to save the individual, but to protect the gene pool of the race. Just as a surgeon cuts out a tumor from the body, Nazi doctors had to excise the defective elements from society. This ideological foundation gave birth to the largest mass sterilization operations in history. With the Law for the Prevention of Hereditarily Diseased Offspring enacted in 1933, approximately 400,000 people with schizophrenia, epilepsy, blindness, deafness, or physical deformities were forcibly sterilized. But this was only the beginning. Scientific laboratories needed fresh subjects to prove their theories. And with the outbreak of World War II, millions of people gathered from all across Europe would be left to the absolute mercy of these laboratories. History remembers him by a single name: the Angel of Death, Der Todesengel, Dr. Joseph Mengele. Mengele was not a product of ignorance, but of the highest education system of his time. He studied anthropology and medicine at the University of Munich and stood out as a brilliant researcher at the Frankfurt University Institute for Hereditary Biology and Racial Hygiene. His goal was simple: to crack the genetic secrets of the Aryan race, to artificially increase the birth rate of blonde, blue-eyed children, and to find out how to eliminate defective genes. When he was assigned to Auschwitz-Birkenau in 1943, he did not view it as a death camp, but as the world's largest and most unrestricted human laboratory. Why? Because everything a scientist would normally be restricted from doing by ethical rules, even on animals, was completely permitted here. There were no laws, No moral boundaries, no accountability. Mengele's greatest obsession was twins. He would personally select twin children from among the families stepping off the trains, treating them slightly better than the other prisoners. He gave them sweets, introduced himself as Uncle Mengele, and sometimes even played games with them. But this was merely a mask for pure sadism and cold-bloodedness. The purpose of Mengele's experiments on twins was to measure the dominance of heredity and genetics over environment. He wanted to see how an intervention on one twin would affect the other. The experiments were, quite literally, horrifying. He injected chemical substances directly into the pupils of twins to try and change their eye color. These attempts blinded dozens of children, causing excruciating pain and severe infections. He dripped acid onto children's skin to study skin pigmentation, amputated limbs, and performed bone marrow transplants without any anesthesia. Even more terrifyingly, when one twin died or was killed, Mengele would immediately kill the other twin by injecting phenol directly into their heart. Do you know why? So that he could compare the internal organs of both siblings simultaneously on the autopsy table. Inspecting the organs of two healthy siblings at the exact same moment was a flawless data source for his pseudo-scientific papers. On one occasion, he attempted to create artificial Siamese twins by sewing two Romani twins together back to back. The children died days later in their mother's arms from the agonizing pain of gangrene and infection. Out of approximately 3,000 twin children who passed through Mengele's laboratory, only a few hundred survived. Mengele used science not to advance humanity, but to manufacture biological evidence for a twisted ideology. And the most painful part? After the war ended, this man never faced justice. He fled to South America, lived under false identities, and died in 1979 by drowning after suffering a stroke while swimming in Brazil. Justice never paid its debt to Mengele's victims. The human experiments of Nazi Germany were not limited to Mengele's genetic obsessions. The German military, particularly the Air Force, Luftwaffe, sought help from the medical world to simulate the challenges soldiers would face on the front lines and to increase their survival rates. The place that answered this call for help was the Dachau concentration camp near Munich. These experiments were led by an SS doctor named Dr. Sigmund Rascher. Rascher wondered what happened to the brains and bodies of German pilots when their cabin pressure dropped at very high altitudes, or when they were forced to parachute out. For this purpose, special low-pressure chambers were built in Dachau. Prisoners were locked inside these chambers, and the air inside was artificially evacuated to replicate atmospheric conditions at altitudes of 12,000, 15,000, or even 20,000 meters. This meant the lack of oxygen and the sudden drop in pressure would tear the human body apart from the inside out while the subject was still fully conscious. Watching the prisoner's agony through small viewing windows in the chambers, Rascher noted these cold words in his reports. Shortly after being subjected to the pressure, the subject began knocking his head against the walls. Soon after, he lost motor functions, convulsed, and subsequently lost consciousness. Air bubbles were observed forming in the blood vessels of the brain. Rascher would immediately dissect the brains of the deceased subjects to examine the effects of high pressure on cerebral vessels. Out of the hundreds of people who entered these chambers, almost none made it out alive. Another military dilemma was that German pilots crashing into the North Sea died within minutes due to hypothermia. Rascher and his team launched the freezing experiments to solve this. Victims were submerged into tanks filled with freezing water in the dead of winter. They were kept in that water for hours until their body temperatures dropped to 28, 25, or even 22 degrees Celsius. Every single biological data point during the human freezing process, heart rates, respiration patterns, was recorded second by second. While human beings agonizingly froze to death, doctors sipped their coffee nearby and drew charts. Once a subject reached the freezing point, different methods were tested to revive them. hot baths, warming lamps, or using the body heat of other human subjects transferred through forced physical contact. The data gathered from these experiments was proudly presented to distinguished professors at aviation medicine conferences. No one stood up to ask, "Where did you get this data? What did you do to these people?" Scientific curiosity had completely swallowed the moral compass. We now turn our gaze north of Berlin to the Ravensbrück concentration camp, where only women were imprisoned. The experiments performed here targeted battlefield injuries and infections. German soldiers fighting on the muddy, freezing terrains of the Eastern Front were being wounded by shrapnel. Their wounds became infected, and thousands were dying of gangrene. At the time, penicillin was not yet widely available in Germany. Nazi scientists wanted to test whether a synthetic antibiotic called sulfanilamide could prevent these deadly infections. The man leading these experiments was Dr. Karl Gebhardt. Gebhardt wanted to simulate battlefield wounds exactly as they occurred. To do this, he selected healthy, young Polish women. Deep incisions were made into these women's legs using surgical knives. Dirty mud from the streets, rusty nails, wood splinters, and glass shards were deliberately forced into the wounds. Thus, the filthy environment of the battlefield was recreated right inside the woman's leg. To accelerate the spread of infection, the blood vessels supplying circulation to the legs were tied off at both ends. Within less than a day, the women's legs began to swell, fester, and rot. Burning with fever and screaming in agony, some of these women were given sulfanilamide, while others were given absolutely nothing to compare the drug's effectiveness. The women were abandoned to a slow, living death that lasted for days. Their bones became inflamed and their muscles decayed. Those who survived were left permanently crippled. The other prisoners in the camp dubbed these test subjects the rabbits because they were constantly being experimented on. Gebhardt and his team proudly presented these medical reports at congresses in Berlin. Human life had been reduced to a simple statistical data point measuring the efficacy of an antibiotic. The darkness of Nazi laboratories was not confined to just a few camps. The medical network of the Third Reich was like a massive spiderweb spreading across all of occupied Europe. One of the greatest risks brought by war was infectious diseases: typhus, yellow fever, malaria, and tuberculosis. Doctors turned the camps into vaccine and virus testing centers. At the Buchenwald concentration camp, Dr. Erwin Ding Schuler and his team intentionally injected healthy prisoners with the typhus virus. Hundreds of people were first artificially infected, and then experimental vaccines were tested on them. The victims whom the vaccine failed to protect died from weeks of high fever, delirium, and internal bleeding. As soon as they died, new subjects were injected to take their place. This was quite literally a virus factory. However, the most heart-wrenching page of these experiments was written at the Neuengamme concentration camp near Hamburg. Dr. Kurt Heissmeyer selected 20 Jewish children, ranging in age from 5 to 12, for his tuberculosis experiments. Tuberculosis bacilli were injected directly into the children's lungs. The children became gravely ill in a short time. Heissmeyer did not stop there. He surgically removed the children's axillary lymph nodes while they were fully conscious, without any anesthesia. As the end of the war neared and the British Army approached Hamburg, orders were given to destroy all evidence. The 20 children were taken to the basement of the Bullenhuser Dam School. They were injected with morphine to sedate them and then hanged one by one from pipes in the basement. But history never forgot the names of those children, nor the monstrosity of Heissmeyer. Most of the experiments we have described so far had some form of military or medical justification: saving pilots, preventing infections, finding vaccines. However, what we are about to describe now is one of the most abstract atrocities of Nazi science, built entirely on ideological delusion and hatred. At the center of this story is Dr. August Hirt, head of the Anatomy Institute at the University of Strasbourg. Hirt had a grand dream. Once the war was over and the Jewish race was completely annihilated, he wanted to establish a massive Jewish skeleton collection to show future generations what the so-called extinct subhumans looked like. He wrote an official letter to Heinrich Himmler outlining his project. Himmler thought the idea was brilliant. In 1943, 86 Jewish prisoners were meticulously selected from Auschwitz based on anthropological measurements and sent to the Natzweiler Struthof concentration camp in France. First, their photographs were taken and body measurements were recorded. Then they were killed in the gas chamber using a chemical gas specifically chosen not to damage their bones. The corpses were immediately transported to the Anatomy Institute of the University of Strasbourg. Hirt and his assistants stored them in large vats filled with formaldehyde and worked to strip the flesh from the bodies to turn them into skeletons. When Allied soldiers approached Strasbourg in late 1944, Hirt panicked and tried to destroy the tattoos and identification numbers on the corpses, but he ran out of time. When French soldiers entered the laboratory, they found dozens of intact human bodies stored inside the vats. August Hirt fled and committed suicide. The identities of those 86 victims were uncovered one by one after decades of meticulous research. They were not just skeleton specimens. Each one had a name, a family, and a life. When the war ended, it left behind a devastated Europe and horrifying truths spilling out from the concentration camps. The world expected the military crimes of Nazi Germany, but the abyss into which the medical world had fallen shocked everyone. In 1946, a special tribunal was established in Nuremberg, the doctors' trial. 23 high-ranking Nazi medical administrators and doctors sat in the defendant's dock. Among them were Karl Brandt, Hitler's personal physician, and Karl Gebhardt, who had mutilated the legs of women at Ravensbrück. Their defense was identical. We only carried out the orders of our state. These experiments were necessary for the advancement of medicine. In wartime, the deaths of a few hundred people saved the lives of thousands of soldiers on the front. In other words, they claimed the end justifies the means. This is what they said when they detached science from morality. The court rejected this defense. 7 doctors, including Karl Brandt and Karl Gebhardt, were sentenced to death and hanged. However, the greatest legacy this trial left to human history was the Nuremberg Code. Published in 1947, this 10-point declaration is the constitution of modern medical ethics. Its first and most crucial point states, "The voluntary consent of the human subject is absolutely essential." This means that no matter how monumental the scientific purpose may be, a human being can never be made the object of an experiment without their free will and full awareness. The atrocities of Nazi doctors taught the medical world a very painful lesson. Science detached from morality and love for humanity is not a light that serves mankind. It is the most perfect darkness that destroys it. Today, many years have passed since the collapse of the Third Reich. Yet the shadow of Nazi science still hangs over the medical world as a profound philosophical debate. Is it ethical to use scientific data that was obtained at the cost of horrific suffering and monstrosity? The data obtained from the freezing experiments in Dachau is still used today in modern aviation and maritime medicine, because no democratic state can ever freeze a human being to the brink of death just to gather data. Similarly, the Pernkopf Anatomy Atlas, prepared during the Nazi era and considered the most detailed anatomy atlas in the world, was used as a guide by world-renowned surgeons until recent history. However, it was later revealed that the models for those flawless drawings were political prisoners and victims executed by the Nazis. Many scientists completely refused to use this data, labeling it the poisoned fruit. Others argued, those victims are already gone. At least let the data obtained from their suffering be used today to keep other people alive. There is no absolute answer to this question, but there is one thing we do know. The moment science is not bounded by human rights and morality, every single one of us is reduced to nothing more than a subject number. The Nazis' dream of a master race collapsed. They left behind nothing but mass graves, shattered lives, and a medical legacy that humanity will forever look upon with shame. History has shown us in the most painful way possible how those who hold the power of science can turn into monsters the moment they lose their conscience. In this episode of our journey into the untold pages of history, we examined the greatest mass monstrosity hidden beneath medical gowns. Our purpose was not just to recount past atrocities, but to remind ourselves once more why morality and human dignity must stand above all else when charting the future course of science. If you found this documentary meaningful, please don't forget to like the video, subscribe to our channel, and share your thoughts in the comments so that these dark pages of history are never forgotten. Do you believe scientifically valuable data obtained through immense suffering should be used to save lives today? Or should it be buried in the darkness of history? Let's discuss in the comments. In the next episode, we will continue to trace the untold stories in another labyrinth of the past. Until then, stay with science, stay with reason, and most importantly, stay with conscience. Goodbye.